here if it wasn't for him.
Oh, from what?
From
From 1539
by
after he was
Theodore
dead?
de Bry in the late 1500s to illustrate the conquest we're going to
He
cover
was dead. It was
based
not
off
him.
first-hand historical evidence and were created to accompany the translation of the eyewitness account of Franciscan friar Bartolome de las Casas.
That's a
And who
If
lie.
you brought a sign with
That's
you
a
with
lie.
an alternative
That's a lie.
suggestion to replace this monument, we're here to
Phony,
protest.
fake,
I
fraud,
hope you will
lies.
stay till the end so we can take a photo group photo.
That's a lie. That's a
Because
lie. That's
this
a
is
lie.
a protest. I'm expecting us to respect one another, the
I'm
usual
protesting.
rules of keeping
Protesting. You're
sidewalks
used to having
clear
everything your way.
for pedestrians is important, and working towards non-violent de-escalation if we encounter any
Statue ain't coming
hecklers.
down. You're wasting your time.
Many of
Hecklers,
us have
not
been taught
under the-
to
not under the
recognize that this
They can let you racists think
is
like that.
Columbus Day. Over the years,
Yes, we were.
we've witnessed this holiday receive
posted, all are
reasonable
invited.
criticism
Yeah,
over its
kindness and-
distortion in hopes it would reflect an accurate history and consider how our past, our present, and our future are burdened by these falsehoods. As a result, some people have chosen to recognize today as Indigenous Day. Indigenous
They have a
Peoples
whole
Day.
month of November.
In Mexico,
Okay.
the
Native
12th of
Americans
October,
They're from
Any
Eastern
day.
Asia.
Okay, and you also have
Why don't you
August.
say that? Tell them that. They're from Eastern Asia, the Native Americans. They're not indigenous to here. Those are facts.
okay, all I'm asking is for respect to be able to speak.
I'm
If you can't do
protesting. I can protest.
yes, please keep your distance.
No, these are
Respect
mine.
your
I don't even have
But
a
you are
phone.
more than welcome.
I understand, but you're
Okay.
approaching it in
To
a
look
very
up is
aggressive way, and
only
it's not
us.
respectful.
Yeah.
So, as I was saying,
Lie.
some people have chosen to
Native
recognize
Americans
today
were from
as
Eastern
Indigenous
Asia.
Peoples Day.
Lie. They're not indigenous.
In Mexico, the 12th of October is called the Day
That's
of
a
the
lie.
Raza,
And what is the
or
month of
the
November?
Day of the
Can you
Race, the
answer
one
that,
race
please?
as it now
What about
exists of
August?
Spanish,
Lies.
Indigenous,
Days on
and
the
African
calendar,
blood.
the whole month.
In Uruguay, the indigenous population commemorates October 11, 1492 as their last day of freedom. These are regions that were directly impacted
Columbus
by
never
the
owned a
actions that
slave.
were introduced by Columbus
He
and
brought
his
Native
men
Americans
when
back
he
to
landed
Spain,
in the
had them
Caribbean.
baptized, and adopted one of the natives. That's how
example.
nice of him.
This is an example of the oppression we don't wish to have here.
What are you
Know your
talking about? We
facts.
don't
Are
know.
the
They don't
regions
know
that were
this. Right?
directly
They know what you're going to
impacted
say.
by the actions that were introduced by Columbus
Anyone
and
does
his
not know
men
what they're
when he
talking about.
landed in the Caribbean. In the
Lie.
United States, Colorado was the first state to make Columbus Day an official holiday.
So what?
And in
Good for
2020,
them.
Colorado stopped
Good for
honoring
them.
Columbus Day,
He's
but
an
like
American
us
hero.
here, because like us here,
They're all
He's not-
stoners.
they wanted to find a way to uplift Italian Americans.
He
So they
wanted to
voted
make a
to replace it with a
caricature. She couldn't
holiday
do better.
honoring Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini. This made history as it was also marked
You don't tell
as
me.
the
You
first
don't know
Canadian
history.
holiday to ever honor a
my dear.
woman nationally. While Columbus is acknowledged in Italy as a historical figure, he is not recognized as a national hero. And
Talk to
is
the
not a central
consulate.
figure who
Talk
has
to
been
the
raised to be
consulate.
in the U.S. Considering Columbus never stepped foot in the United States, it's critical to understand how he became the association
It is
to Italian
critical
American
for you to
culture.
understand.
Here's a brief snapshot.
It was the
In the
continent.
1820s, Italian Americans were
You're a
immigrants
racist.
The
in the
continent.
U.S.
You
They
can't.
had darker
You can't
skins
even
and
translate it
ancestors,
properly.
You're racist.
came from
Go
northern
home.
parts of Europe and were Catholics, not
Anti-Italian
Protestant.
bigot. That's
As
what
a
you are.
result, they dealt with a lot of
a
discrimination.
fact.
Just as
You do.
immigrants face
Anti-Italian
prejudice in the
bigot.
U.S. today,
That's what you
at
are.
times they were subject to violent attacks. In 1892, during the presidential election
Columbus
year,
was dead in
President
1892.
Benjamin
What are you saying?
Harrison
Listen,
He was
called
dead.
for a
I don't
national
wanna listen.
observance
It's
of
all
Columbus
bull crap.
Day
I don't
as
wanna
his
listen.
way to court Italian American voters.
It was
and
because we were
improve
going to
the
go to
strained
war.
relationship with
Italy was going to go to war
Very upset by
because
the
of the
mass
treatment
lynching
of Italians.
11 Italian Americans in New
That's why we
Orleans
are a protected
in
class.
1891. Some people thought the way to resolve the anti-Italian immigrant feud was to uplift a hero from Italy, and so Columbus was chosen. At the time, Italian Americans who been fighting discrimination hoped that a nation honoring Columbus would realize that its empire is indebted to people from Italy, and so they deserved respect and acceptance.
That's right.
It
Leave our
hardly
statue
shocking
alone.
that a
Leave
figure
our
like Columbus
statue
could so
alone.
neatly nestle his way into American culture when our country also has a
You're
long history
habitual
of slavery and violent imperialistic tendencies.
It's not
Logically,
true.
in 1934,
Read his
President
writings.
FDR made Columbus Day a national holiday, and in 1971, Congress
Anti-Italian bigot.
It's not one-sided.
Get your facts straight without bullhorn. I can say anything I want. I'm protesting. Anti-Italian bigot. That's what they are. That's why you're here. That's why you're a hater. That's why you're here. Anti-Italian, anti-history bigot.
So Congress stated that Columbus Day would be a holiday observed on the second Monday of October annually. It's important to note that the members of the mob who committed the lynching in 1891, despite being well known in their community, were never arrested or prosecuted. I understand the level of desperation Italian Americans
in Bloomfield
must have been under to seek out any form of acceptance then. Under the threats of extreme racism and xenophobia, understandably, any form of appeasement by our government was a step towards being treated like fellow human beings. A gesture, I will remind you, Columbus denied the Tainos of the Caribbean.
Anti-Italian bigot.
But to continue elevating him with the information we all have access to now is counterintuitive and cheapens the culture by shape-shifting it so it can align itself with the very acts of aggression Italian Americans sought protection from.
in Bloomfield.
Cherry-picking and distorting the history of Columbus may have successfully gained Italian favor with the dominant group in the U.S., but it seeks approval for the inhumane treatment of people to be justified as a necessary means that's doomed to be replicated because it's not being denounced. When we elevate cruel figures, we risk cruel outcomes being repeated.
Are you saying we're bigots?
When we elevate
what a lie!
figures,
Anti-Italian bigot.
when we elevate cruel figures,
Who's the
we
anti-American?
risk cruel outcomes
Anti-Italian
being
bigots.
repeated. This is the reason Germany refuses to raise up any monument of Hitler. What I find most shocking with this decision is that Italy is not short of the number of influential Italian figures that could better portray what Italian culture has so rightfully to brag about without the task of bearing shame. So yes, yay for Italy.
Yay for Italy.
Yes.
Boom for the
This
bigots.
is why I've asked for others to research possible alternatives that would show off Italian pride without the need for erasure, without the need to sell out their culture to the oppressor, and without glorifying the genocide of the indigenous people who are ancestors to those with roots to the Caribbean and Latin America. So now we're going to go over the facts. No one knows what Columbus actually looked like. He never had an official portrait rendered when he was alive, so any existing portraits are fantasies made after his death. This monument behind us could literally be anyone. There are also no surviving plans for the ships, so we can't be sure what they look like or how large they were. Columbus miscalculated the size of the Earth, which is partly why he struggled to obtain funding to sail to the West. Educated people at the time already knew the Earth was round. The idea he set out to prove the Earth was round was invented in 1828 when Washington Irving published the life and voyages of Christopher Columbus.
And what year was that? What year? What year?
1828.
Okay.
Columbus was not the first person to consider that it might be possible to reach the
Because you're rewriting
by
history.
sailing west. That was Paolo da Pozzo Toscanelli. Columbus was convinced he was in Asia the entire time. His labeling the indigenous, as we know, his labeling the indigenous as Indians. Columbus wasn't the first person to sail across the Atlantic or to visit the Western Hemisphere, which had already been known to the Vikings since the 11th century. Columbus named his search for funding the Enterprise of the Indies, which is seen as a perfect name for its motivating force was a search for profits. Queen Isabella never sold her jewels to fund the voyages. Her manager of accounts moved money around and came up with enough to send Columbus on the trip.
Why? Why?
Again, Columbus
Why? Because they
never
wanted
stepped
the
foot
money
in
to
the
take
United
back
States.
Jerusalem
And Columbus
from the
didn't
Muslims.
discover anything.
Columbus
Columbus didn't discover
the Holy
anything.
Land.
The
Get your
Tainos,
history straight.
That's why.
You bigot.
who are
That's
the people
why.
that have been living there
Tell
for
the whole
thousands
story.
of years,
You're
raising
taking
their families,
excerpts.
running their
Excerpts.
societies, and trading with their neighbors. All ships returning to Spain from the
It's
first voyage
disgusting.
had taken
And this is
prisoners.
what they're teaching
They
in
grabbed
our
some of their
schools.
visitors and locked them up, all without noise or trouble, as Columbus's son Hernando put it in his later history of the voyages. Capturing people
Read his
slaves
son's-
wasn't part of
read
the
his
original
son's
plan for
excerpts.
Columbus's voyage.
You're taking
Columbus
pieces and
was looking for other ways to make his trip profitable,
switching words
since
around.
his plan to land in Asia to trade spices and get rich clearly did not come to fruition. Quote, however,
That's not
should
to
your
get rich.
highness command
It was for
all
Christianity.
inhabitants could be taken away to Castile,
And
or
that's
held
all
as
this
slaves
is.
on
It's
the
a
island,
socialist
for
agenda
which
to get rid
50
of
men
Christianity.
could subjugate them all and make them do whatever
That is
whatever
not
he
what he
wished.
said. You're taking
Columbus
it
wrote that down.
Hey, that's not the whole. That's not the whole
Too
part.
many of the
You're only
slaves
taking a
died in
piece of it.
captivity. And so Columbus, desperate to
You
pay
call
back
them
dividends to those
servants
he had
of
invested,
God. That
had
they would
to
be
take-
easily
had
be
to make good on
servants
his
of
promise
God.
to fill the ships with gold. Our early education on Columbus romanticizes his first voyage and ignores the subsequent returns, which arguably show the level of his greed and cruelty
Liar.
that lead him to
Terrible.
lose
Fake
favor with the
history.
crown. From his first voyage, he wrote the following
the
about his
grammar
encounter with the natives. Quote,
They
and
didn't
as
even
soon,
teach
as
this
soon
in
as I
grammar
arrived
school.
in the Indies on
That's
the
the
first
sad
island which I
part.
found, I
But
took
they're
some
gonna
of the
take
natives
Zinn
by
and
force
Coney.
in order that they might learn and might give me information for whatever
Bigot.
there is in these parts. As
Anti-Italian
soon as
bigot.
they have, as
because
soon
it
as
was
they
all
see
for their
they are
political
safe
agenda.
and have laid aside all fear, they are very simple and honest and exceedingly liberal with all they have. None of them refusing anything he may possess. See, you gotta listen to fucking people tabs. You gotta listen to pay attention. You're like making up stories over there.
What a
So
phony.
Columbus says, as soon as they see that they are safe and have laid aside all their fear, they are very simple and honest and exceedingly liberal with all they have. None of them refusing anything he may
And they
possess
were
when he
giving
asks
things in
for it,
return for
but
everything
on
that
the
they
contrary, inviting us to ask them. They exhibit great love toward all others and preference to themselves. They also give objects of great value for trifles and content themselves with very little or nothing in return. I did not find, as some of us had expected, any cannibals among them, but on the contrary,
Because that was the
men of great
Carabes.
deference and kindness. No one would
The
believe it
Carabes were
without
the
having
cannibals.
seen it. Of anything they have, if you ask for them, they never say no.
Who annihilated
Rather,
them and
they
all the
invite you to
Spaniards
share
that were left
anything-
behind.
Anything that they possess, and
Anti-American
show as much
bigot.
love as if their hearts went with it. End quote. His second voyage was a different experience. On his second visit, most villages stood empty when the Spaniards came ashore.
Bigot. Anti-Italian bigot. There she is. There they are.
Now, just misguided and misread because they're going under the works of the Zinn
The
and
slave
Coney.
trade immediately turned out to be unprofitable for the slaves. Mostly died.
America
Columbus
stopped slavery.
decided to concentrate
America
on
stopped
gold.
slavery.
Although he wrote, quote,
America
let us
stopped
in the name
slavery.
of Holy
Put that in
Trinity
your
go
thing.
on sending all the slaves that can be sold, end quote.
America stopped
During his
slavery.
second
Put that
visit,
in
Columbus
your
was
thing.
losing
He didn't
favor
even
amongst his
slave
own men.
anyone.
The
Why are
Spanish
you
royals
lying?
sent one of their loyal household officials, Juan Aguado, to investigate Columbus and his brother Diego.
Yeah.
Aguado reported back that Columbus was indeed mismanaging the territory, that native people were dying, and so were the colonists. To fill the empty ships going back to Castile, to stop his detractors from talking, And to prove his success, Columbus needed gold. He established a system adopted for this end. He ordered all persons 14 years or older to collect a certain quantity of gold every 3 months. When they brought it, they were given copper tokens to hang around their necks. The natives found without a copper token had their hands cut off and bled to death. Those who tried to flee in the mountains were systematically hunted down with dogs and killed to set an example for the others to keep trying.
He wasn't
When the Spaniards took prisoners, they hung them or burned them to death. Among the natives, mass suicides began with cassava poison. Infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. During those two, Columbus was the governor at the time. Columbus was the governor who was setting policy at the time.
There, that was done while he was gone.
If it wasn't Columbus, it was his brother there, right? It was them who were setting policy.
No, it
During
was
those
not.
2 years of the administration
so
of
do you
Brothers
wanna have a
Columbus,
conversation or
an
just wanna
estimated
talk about what you
1/2 of the
want?
entire
So why don't you invite
population of Hispania people can speak afterwards. You're welcome to talk
Can I
afterwards.
have the bullhorn?
You should have brought your own.
Nobody had one. May I please?
Go to Spain.
Depending on how you behave during this part, I'll determine that at the end.
Go to Spain.
When the Spaniards took prisoners,
I'm not
they
misbehaving.
hung them or burned them to death. I read that part. So infants were killed to save them from the Spaniards. During those 2 years of the administration of Brothers Columbus, an estimated 1/2 of the entire population of Hispaniola was killed or killed themselves. The estimates run from 125,000
It's
to
not
500,000.
even possible.
When it
That's not
became
even
clear
possible. There
that there
weren't
was
enough
no
men to
gold
even
left,
do that.
the natives were taken as slave labor on huge estates. Columbus set policy on huge estates known later as encomiendas. The Spanish claimed estates for themselves. The natives still living on this land became their property. They were worked at a ferocious pace and died by the thousands. In the book, The History of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas, he wrote the following about the treatment of natives in Cuba under this system. Quote, thus husbands and wives were together not only once every 8 or 10 months, and when they met were so exhausted and depressed on both sides, they ceased to procreate. As for the newly born, they died early because their mothers, overworked and famished, had no milk to nurse them. And for this reason, while I was in Cuba, 7,000 children died in 3 months. Some mothers even drowned their babies from sheer desperation. In this way, husbands died in the mines, wives died at work, and children died from lack of milk. And in that short time, this land, which was so great, so powerful and fertile, was depopulated. My eyes have seen these acts so foreign to human nature, and I now tremble as I write. End quote. Tensions continued to grow under Columbus. Colonists and natives were rebelling against Spanish officials. During Columbus's 3rd voyage, Francisco de Bobadilla was given more power to investigate the situation and restore order. As soon as Bobadilla landed, he seized control, arrested Diego, and demanded that Columbus surrender too. On October 1500, both Diego and Christopher Columbus were boarded a ship in chains, sent back to Spain. Columbus spent 6 weeks in jail, but eventually the king and queen ordered him released. They let him keep some of his titles and all of his property, but banned him from setting foot on Hispaniola ever again and removed his total authority. Columbus spent his 4th voyage exploring parts of South America, having strained his relationship with those in command in the Caribbean. He died 2 years later after his return to Spain in 1506. In the words of his son, he died, quote, from gout and other ills, and from grief at seeing himself so fallen from his high estate.
He died a hero.
Despite his
Best
death,
navigator in the world.
conditions for the natives continued to worsen over time.
He died a
In
hero.
1542,
Columbus
Spain enacted a law meant to abolish
Anti-
slavery of the native people of the Americas.
Columbus is a
Bartolome de
hero.
las Casas led the campaign for these new laws, although so much damage was already done. After Columbus died, he was largely forgotten. By the late 1700s, Columbus was becoming popular in the United States. Some people argued the U.S. should be named after Columbus, but they didn't win the argument. The Americas were named after Amerigo Vespucci. So why the sudden interest in the 1700s? America just won its independence from Great Britain in the Revolutionary War, and people were searching for a symbol of their history that didn't revolve around the nation they'd spent years fighting. The U.S. was also expanding territory, which meant taking even more native land. As we covered earlier, support for celebrating Columbus grew stronger, and the U.S. responded to violent attacks on Italian-American immigrants. The cultural appropriation of Columbus by Italians is interesting because we can't honestly say he was Italian. Italy didn't exist well beyond 355 years after Columbus's death. Italy became a country in 1861 and had a need for national myths and heroes at the time to form a new national identity. Genoa, his country of origin, had been an independent republic, so to call him Italian today is to hold him up to modern day standards, which ironically is something we're told is inappropriate to do. Let's be clear, we're not gathering today to hold Columbus up to present day standards. We do live in a different time.
He's a hero.
If Columbus were alive today, I'm not sure anyone would be celebrating him at all. Italians today in Italy are engaging in nationwide protests as the anti-fascists that they are against the colonialization of Palestine, forcing its government to take formal action against genocide. If we were going to hold Columbus up against today's modern-day standards, he'd probably be at the top of ISIS's list for meeting their description of the violent criminal immigrant who invades, rapes, and murders.
Phony history, liar, anti-Italian bigot. That's what you are. Put that in your book.
But we're not going to do that. We're going to judge him by the standards that were raised by upstanding contemporaries of his. Those words revolutionized the treatment of the indigenous community in the mid-1500s. Remember that when you hear the argument that you can't compare Columbus to modern-day standards. After we're finished today, you will realize history did judge him, and modern-day people chose to ignore the facts and rewrote the story. History has been revised to maintain a narrative that seeks present-day approval.
You're guilty of revising history. You bigot,
corrupted by greed.
Everyone loves
you. To show some fairness to Columbus, is following a special decree that had been set forth by the Pope called the Doctrine of Discovery, where it permitted European countries, quote, claim to take any lands that were empty and that included lands inhabited by people who weren't Christians. If resistance was shown,
Native Americans are
Catholics of the time believed the Pope never made mistakes. This doctrine guided European colonization. As this points out, laws are not always ethical and do not always align with justice. In this case, it completely ignores the indigenous people's need to resist unprovoked violence. Bartolomé de las Casas documented the following book in Book 2 of History of the Indies. Quote, endless testimonies prove the mild and pacific temperament of the natives. But our work was so exasperate, ravage, kill, mangle, and destroy. Small wonder then if they tried to kill one of us every now and then. The Admiral, Columbus, it is true, was blind as those who came after him, and was so anxious to please the king that he committed irreparable crimes against the Indians, end quote. Bartolomé de las Casas, who was an admirer, not an enemy of Columbus, said that Columbus was, quote, at the beginning of the ill usage inflicted upon them, end quote. Of Columbus, Las Casas shared the following, quote, how far the Admiral was from the proper observation of divine and natural law, and how little he understood the duty of the king and queen and of himself towards these natives.
You won't be here
for Columbus. Could say that they might take all these the natural inhabitants of these islands to Castile or make them slaves on their own land. This was very far from the purpose of God and His Church, to whom His voyage and the discovery of all this world and everything in and about it should have been dedicated. End quote. Bartolomé de las Casas' account denounced the atrocities committed by the Spaniards, led by Columbus, in the New World, since the beginning of the conquest and throughout the colonization.
Liar!
His work influenced Spain to change public policy for the West Indies. So what does this mean for us for our future? Here's an excerpt that I want you to really
He was
listen
so
to.
pious that men today should try to honor and emulate him.
Anti-Catholic bigot.
You can laugh all you want.
Anti-American,
But you really should read his
A
writings.
world of contending interests where any chosen emphasis
That
supports,
Koning and
whether
Zen took the
historian
excerpts
means
and
to or not,
read
some
Rafael
kind of
Ortiz
interest,
from
whether
Puerto Rico.
economic or
Okay, his
political
4
or
books.
racial or national or
Let's take a
sexual.
listen.
To emphasize the heroism of
Who's
Columbus and
Thanos?
his successors
A
as
dissent.
navigators and discoverers, and to de-emphasize their genocide is
Read
not
Mary
a technical
Graber.
necessity but an ideological choice. It serves unwittingly to justify what was done.
Not by his hands.
My point is not that we must, and telling history, accuse, judge, and condemn Columbus in absentia. It is too late for that. It would be a useless scholarly exercise in morality, but the easy acceptance
The
of
fact that you're
atrocity
lying is immoral.
as a deplorable but
It's
necessary
deplorable.
price to pay for progress.
It's deplorable.
Examples include Hiroshima and Vietnam to save Western civilization, Kronstadt in Hungary
Can you
to
please
save
tell me-
socialism, nuclear
Please.
proliferation to save us all. That is still with us. One reason though these atrocities are still with us is that we have learned to bury them in a massive other facts as radioactive waste are buried in containers in the earth. We have learned to give them exactly the same proportion of attention that teachers and writers often give them in the most respectful classroom
Socialist writers, communist and Marxist writers that are being taught in schools today. These are not facts. They do not allow people to formulate their own opinion.
It is therefore more
It's all
deadly.
tainted.
Was all this bloodshed and deceit from Columbus to Cortez, Pizarro, the Puritans, necessary for the human race to
He
progress
was a pious
from
man.
From savagery to civilization?
Yes.
Perhaps
There
because
isn't
basic
an
argument can be
ethnicity
made
in
as
this
it was
world
made
that
by
did not
Stalin
rape and
when he
pillage.
killed peasants for
Disgustingly.
industrial progress in the Soviet
Why
Union.
you
can't hold
As it was
Columbus
made
accountable
by
for what happened
explaining
to
the
him.
bombings of Dresden and Hamburg, and Truman explaining Hiroshima. But how can the judgment be made if the benefits and losses cannot be balanced? Because the losses are either unmentioned or mentioned too quickly. What did people in Spain get out of all the death and brutality visited on the Indians of the Americas? For a brief period in history, there was the glory of the Spanish Empire in the Western Hemisphere, as Hans Koning
They
summed
were
it up.
friends.
For all the gold and silver stolen and shipped to Spain did not make the Spanish
That's
people
right.
richer.
They
It gave
thought he
their
was
kings
sent
an
from
edge in the
God.
balance of power
Because he
over time,
saved them
a
from the
chance to
Muhammad.
hire-
You bigot.
You lost your chances, by the way.
Because I can't just listen to
Ended
the
up
lies.
losing, so
You
for
don't
all
want
the
to have a
gold and
dialogue
silver
and a
stolen
discussion
and
and
shipped
show
to
facts for
Spain,
facts.
stolen and shipped to Spain did not make the Spanish people more richer. It gave their kings an edge in the balance of power
They don't
for
want
a time, a chance to hire more mercenary soldiers for their wars, and they ended up losing these wars anyway.
You're not even
And all that was
historians.
left was a deadly inflation, a starving population, the rich richer, the poor poorer, and a ruined peasant class. If there are necessary
This is an
sacrifices
assault
to be
on
made for human
Christianity.
progress, it is not essential to hold the principle that those to be sacrificed must make that decision themselves? We are discovering
sacrificed
that
people?
the peoples whom
The
we
Incas?
contemptuously called primitive
sacrificed
were vastly
people. The
superior
Incas
householders
sacrificed-
and managers of our earth than we are.
The Indians sacrificed their own
It may be a do
people.
or die fact for us to learn from them in time. We may try to
Thank
redeem
you.
Columbus by stating that he was a man of his time. That is certainly true, and it is to the greater glory to those men who were not of their time. Bartolomé de las Casas, who in vain fought for a half-century to save the natives. Antonio de Montesinos, a Dominican friar who preached in Santo Domingo in
That was
1511.
after.
I am a
what
voice
came by.
crying in the
He said,
wilderness.
Columbus
Pedro
was a
Margarite,
wonderful man.
sickened by the treatment of the natives, left Hispaniola and spoke against Columbus at court. It would be the lives
Is that
of those
Pikachu?
very few men who would
I like
save the
Pikachu.
honor of that holy faith in whose name a continental massacre was committed. Columbus and the Spaniards cut off the hands of the natives who didn't come with enough gold. Men, women, and children on Columbus's Hispaniola were hacked to pieces, and those pieces were sold from stalls to the Spaniards for feeding their dogs.
He was dead. He didn't do that. He was dead.
It was his policy.
It was not his policy.
This was
Why do you keep
military
saying
policy.
that? No, it's
Illegal
not.
to
He
take for the
wrote to
Indians.
everybody
More
not
than
to harm
400 years
anyone.
later,
He
Brazilian
was there on
entrepreneurs cut off the
Christianity.
ears of the
He
natives.
tried to have them baptized so they wouldn't be put into
The
slavery.
Spaniards threw the native
And
children
it's
into
well
sea.
documented in all of his
Thrown into
writing.
hell, children of the devil.
Scalped
The
Americans.
United States General Westmoreland announced an Oriental does not
I
prize
feel
his
like
life
she's a
like we
Trumper.
do.
Fake news.
He used new and improved napalm while the Spaniards in Hispaniola used green wood for burning the Indian caciques in order to make them suffer and scream longer. As an example for the others, of course. In what is now the United States, the indigenous community were destroyed no less effectively than in Hispaniola.
They were from
In
Eastern
Brazil,
Asia. You
the
liar.
curse of the colonists still exists. Genocides have been committed in our current lifetime, like in Ukraine and Palestine today. What do young people absolutely
saying that there's genocide being
Everything's America's fault, you phony. What are you
Absolutely.
preaching? You phony bigot. It's all America's fault. You phony.
So what do
woke
young people learn
bigot.
from this?
You woke
What do we
bigot.
learn about today's
Woke
world?
bigot.
That white people have a right to dominate peoples of color? That
Bigot.
might or wealth
Bigot.
makes
Racist.
right? That it's
Racist
justified
bigot.
to take people's land
White hater
more
bigot.
civilized or have a better religion? Are we committed then to continue in that bloody track?
Why don't you
Shouldn't
continue
we
to go
try
home,
to
you
have our
bigot?
thoughts on the anniversary
Phony bigot.
of the day it all began?
Bigot. All of
Run
it.
in a
Bigots.
new direction?
Phony woke
Shouldn't we
bigots.
change the name? Our false heroes have
Greatest
long
country
burdened
in
our
the world.
history and
You
our
phony
character, as you
bigot.
can see. Shouldn't we wind up that enterprise of Columbus and start thinking of a truly new world? And so I wrap this up saying, these monuments of historical Italian figures who don't risk staining your cultural reputation and who are ahead of their time. Our preference for peaceful times depends on
That's
it.
it. Goodbye. All right.
Thank you.
Phony bigot.
Check out the fundraisers that are here. You're raising money
Anti-Italian
for
bigot.
Ukraine. You're
Anti-Catholic
raising
bigot.
money for Palestine. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Phony. Go home. Go home. You made TV. Phony. Bigots. Go home, bigots.